discuss autosomal dominant conditions, all right? Because the questions will come up, right? The disease, the name will be given, then they will say what can be the inheritance, like the AD, AR, XLB, XLR, or maybe the mitochondrial inheritance. So knowing the disease name individually is the most important integral part of gaining this type of questions, and questions are usually come up something like that. So autosomal dominant conditions, it is written in your notes, right? Just follow me. Autosomal recessive conditions are thought to be metabolic as opposed to the autosomal dominant conditions being structural. So you can circle the metabolic, recessive, and structural dominant. Notable exceptions are some metabolic conditions such as Hunter's and G6PD are axing recessive, whilst others are the hyperlipidemia type 2 and hypokalemic periodic paralysis are autosomal dominant. Some structural conditions such as atoxic telangiectasia and Friedreich's ataxias are autosomal recessive. Some of the exceptions are written there, right? The following conditions are autosomal dominant. They start with the achondroplasia. So this is structural flavors, right? So A for absent, chondro means cartilage, plasia means development. So structural developmental defect. So definitely this is a possibility of disease that is the autosomal dominant that we can write. Acute intermittent porphyria. So you can cut it. When I'm saying cut it, I'm coming to this point. And adult polycystic kidney disease, antithrombin 3 deficiency, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, familial adenomatous polyposis, hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia, hereditary spherocytosis, and hereditary non-polyposis colorectal cancer, Huntington's disease, and hyperlipidemia type 2, and hypokalemic periodic paralysis, malignant hyperthermia, Marfan syndrome, myotonic dystrophy, neurofibromatosis, Noonan syndrome, osteogenesis imperfecta, Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, retinoblastoma, Romanov-Wirth syndrome, tuberous sclerosis, and VHL, and also the von Willebrand disease. So, knowing these all disease names and their autosomal dominant is really difficult. So let's do some of the things. It will be effective for your whole life to remember that diseases are autosomal dominant. Let's talk, right? We'll make a box of the list of diseases. We'll write one of the important lists first. If you write that as I said, that the structural diseases are dominant and metabolic disease are autosomal recessive. So the box I'm writing here, the flavor of metabolic, flavor is a metabolic, but they are autosomal dominant disease. So if something like that, so I'm writing the So this will be helpful. Means whenever the disease names come up, like there's metabolic, but it's really autosomal dominant. What are they? I'm saying means you're starting with the A is tension, right? The acute intermittent porphyria, AIP. And A is tension, antithrombin 3 deficiency. In your notes, you see antithrombin 3 deficiency. Next, you can write the hyperlipidemia type 2, H tension hyperlipidemia type 2. And next, hypokalemic periodic paralysis, HPP, all right. Malignant hyperthermia, I'm writing the hyperthermia, bracket MH, malignant hyperthermia. That's it. So these 5 important diseases having a metabolic flavor, but they are autosomal dominant. These are autosomal AH, all right? So AIP, antithrombin 3 deficiency, hyperlipidemia, hypokalemic periodic paralysis, and once again, there is a H for hyperthermia, there is a malignant hyperthermia. Next, I'd like to give a box from here. Mixed, MIXED, the diseases are mostly the autosomal dominant, and these diseases can produce the blue sclera. We can write the causes of blue sclera. They are autosomal dominant. They are autosomal dominant. So what does this mix means? All right, M stands on Marfan syndrome, IMFS. I'm writing I for imperfecta, means the osteogenesis imperfecta. XE for xanthoma elastica. I'm writing the pseudoxanthoma elastica, PXC, and ED for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. All right. So this is the box, my dear. A bit of confusion is there. What is pseudoxanthoma? Because the name is the pseudo, so this is a bit of confusion whether this is autosomal dominant or recessive. The way I'm writing, just write them down so it will be helpful, my dear. And also the familial, just write it down, another important box. The box is really important, that the familial colorectal cancer syndrome, if I'm writing the familial causes of colorectal cancer syndromes, if I'm writing, all right, the most common, right, the familial colorectal cancer syndrome is a H&PCC, and the name is the Lynch's syndrome, all right. It's written hereditary non-polyposis colorectal cancer, and next is the familial adenomatous polyposis coli. Yes, and also another disease that you need to remember, the Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, that you must remember. So these all are autosomal dominant disorders, all right. Next to the disease, you see the hereditary spherocytosis is, of course, this is the autosomal dominant H, hereditary spherocytosis. And then you see the Marfan syndrome, myotonic dystrophy, all right. And also the neurofibromatosis. So myotonic dystrophy and Huntington's disease. I'm writing a small box once again. That is writing the threats I will discuss in another video clips. The trinuclear repeat expansion disorders are F2DH. Just make a box. A small box will be helpful, my dear. So F2DH means F for Friedreich's ataxia is nothing but the autosomal recessive disorder. Fragile X syndrome is nothing but the XLR. And D for dystrophia myotonica, D4 dominant means autosomal dominant, and H for Huntington's disease, once again having D, once again autosomal dominant disease. So these boxes will have the tremendous effects to remember all them together. Next, you see it is written the Romano-Ward syndrome. All right, another box I'd like to do, right? The long QT syndrome means the congenital, if I'm writing. Congenital long QT syndrome having the two diseases. There is the Romano-Ward syndrome, Jarville-Lange-Nielsen syndrome. Jarville-Lange-Nielsen syndrome is autosomal recessive, but having the Romano-Ward syndrome means having the D, of course, this is autosomal dominant disease. Just write them down, all right? This box will be helpful, my dear. Once again, another box, right? Just write them down. Neuroectodermal diseases. Neuroectodermal disease means neurocutaneous syndromes. The two important diseases that we need to remember, my dear. Neuroectodermal disease. Both are autosomal dominant. What is that? That is the neurofibromatosis and once again tuberous sclerosis. Both are autosomal dominant. And other than, right, these boxes that I put here, the other diseases are typically written, they are autosomal dominant diseases. What are they? You see in your notes that autosomal dominant diseases, you see the achondroplasia. If I'm writing the achondroplasia, we can write. And next you see the adult dominant, it is written autosomal dominant PKD, ADPKD itself is a dominant disorder. And next, diseases, right, another disease that the Noonan syndrome, just write it down, the Noonan syndrome. And one other is the von Hippel-Lindau syndrome. All right. So once again, I'm writing a small box of Noonan syndrome. I'm writing Noonan syndrome means the Dunen syndrome. If I'm saying the Dunen syndrome is the dominant disease, and von Hippel-Lindau syndrome, I'm saying the Don Hippel-Lindau syndrome. And these will be helpful. So Noonan syndrome, this D is nothing but the dominant disorder. If you say something like that. So these are the important boxes, my dear. It will be helpful to remember all the diseases all together, and to remember all them together, it will be helpful. I'd like to talk all them together also some of the other diseases. There is the autosomal recessive conditions here. Autosomal recessive conditions are often thought to be metabolic as opposed to the autosomal dominant condition being structural. Notable exceptions are some metabolic conditions such as Hunter's and J6PD are X-linked recessive, whilst others are hyperlipidemia type 2 and hypoglycemic paralysis are autosomal dominant. Some structural conditions such as ataxic telangiectasias and Friedreich's ataxias are autosomal recessive. The following conditions are autosomal recessive, like the albinism, ataxic telangiectasias, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, cystic fibrosis, cystinuria, familial Mediterranean fever, Fanconi anemia, Friedreich's ataxia, Gilbert syndrome, glycogen storage disease, hemochromatosis, homocystinuria, lipid storage disease like the Tay-Sachs, Gaucher's, and Niemann-Pick, mucopolysaccharidosis like the Hurler's, and PKU like the phenylketonuria, sickle cell anemia, thalassemia, Wilson's disease. I'd like to give a box, my dear. These are very helpful, all right. The similar category of the boxes, once again, the metabolic flavors, but these are autosomal dominant. So the same thing, dominant flavor means the name having the familial or hereditary. Usually, they are autosomal dominant, but they are autosomal recessive. The spatial box. So what are the diseases? I am saying the first disease that we need to know, familial Mediterranean fever. Then we call this, there is the hereditary ataxias, is nothing but the Friedreich's ataxia and ataxic telangiectasia. And also, hereditary hemochromatosis. So familial or hereditary word, but they are autosomal recessive. Sometimes these are called that the autosomal codominant fashions, all right? Next, I would like to write here one of the important box, right? The chronic liver disease caused by some of the metabolic disorders, and all are autosomal recessive. Chronic metabolic disorders are the most common cause, the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Next disease is an HH, WD, and A1ATD, and cystic fibrosis. So other than non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, the other 4 important diseases are autosomal recessive disorder. So this is the box once again. And I'd like to write in the box of the mucopolysaccharidosis, SS box, mucopolysaccharidosis. You see it is written the Hunter's disease. We are writing the Ehlers and Hunters, right? If I'm writing the Ehlers is a double R, means the autosomal recessive, just remember. And another one is the Hunters, only single R, means the X-linked recessive. So this is also very important box. Ehlers and Hunter disease of the mucopolysaccharidosis that we need to remember. Next, other diseases that we need to put all together that would be helpful to remember all them together. What is that? That is the box of autosomal recessive disorders like this. The remaining things all together. If I'm writing starting with the congenital adrenal hyperplasia, this is metabolic disorder, metabolic flavor. Then cystinuria, if I'm writing the cystinuria. Or if I'm writing the homocystinuria, so we can write that HCO, homocystinuria. And if I'm writing the Fanconi anemia, is an autosomal recessive disorder. And then if you write the glycogen storage disease plus lipid storage disorder, if I'm writing the lipid storage and glycogen storage, means the storage disease. And the phenylketonuria, if I'm writing, plus phenylketonuria. So this is the box. Autosomal recessive disorders other than the exceptions that we are talking. X-linked recessive conditions, all right? The following conditions are inherited at X-linked recessive fashion. Androgen insensitivity syndrome, Becker's muscular dystrophy, and the color blindness, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, Fabry's disease, G6PD8 deficiency, we should say something like that in hemophilia A and B, and Leach-Nyhan syndrome, Hunter's disease, nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, ocular embolism, retinitis pigmentosa, and Wiskott-Ehlers syndrome. The following diseases have varying patterns of inheritance, with the majority of the being an X-linked recessive fashion, that is a chronic granulomatous disorder. So my dear, I would like to make a box of the important, that is the X-linked recessive disorder. The box means XLR. What I'm saying, right? You must know, I hope that you must know X-linked recessive is the single disease that you know, that hemophilia. So hemophilia A and B is the X-linked recessive disorder, you must know. So what I'm saying, that X-linked recessive disorders is an H disease, if I say. So yes, H for hemophilias A and B, we know that. And second H disease next to another H that we need to remember, then G6PD8 deficiency. Glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase enzyme deficiency that we need to remember. And already we have written, you see, the Hunter's disease is an X-linked recessive disorder. We can write Hunter's. So yes, this is the box for the H disease. And other than H disease, another box that we need to write, that is the A for androgen insensitivity syndrome. Next, Fabry's disease. means the Fabry's disease. A for, once again, Ehlers syndrome. Ehlers syndrome means Wiskott-Ehlers syndrome. So A stands on, we must remember, A is Fabry's and Ehlers syndrome. Next, B for, once again, BMD plus DMD. BMD plus DMD should be remembered, my dear. This is very important. And you see that we have written here, that is the DMD. So I'm writing once again, that is important, that is diabetes insipidus nephrogenic. And if you're writing the C for color blindness plus color blindness along with the retinitis pigmentosa plus Leach-Nyhan syndrome, these all together will have the bundle packs of all diseases, that is the X-linked recessive disorder. X-linked dominant. The following conditions are inherited in an X-linked dominant fashion. Alport syndrome in around 85% cases, like the 10 to 15% cases, are inherited in an autosomal recessive fashion, with the rare autosomal dominant fashions existing. Another one is the rat syndrome. Another one is the vitamin D resistant rickets. So circle the rickets, circle the rat, circle the Alport syndrome. So my dear, yes, the last important box that I am giving, right? That X-linked dominant disease, all right? So what I'm saying, the X-linked dominant disease, that I'm saying the Alport syndrome, we have given the Alport syndrome. We will see in the chapter of nephrology in details. So the Alport syndrome, that will be helpful, yes. When we say that the Alport syndrome, that we need to remember, and we have the two important R that will be helpful, and next R for Ratti syndrome, and next R for rickets. And this is vitamin D resistant, once again, vitamin D resistant rickets. So this is the second box, this is the first box, plus that we need to remember X-linked dominant disorders. I'd like to talk now summary box, my dear. These board discussions, right, about the different diseases of the different categories of autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, and also the X-linked dominant and X-linked recessive disorders, having a very, very important, right, in our preparations. We'll see that how stronger that we are after ending these lectures. So let me start by starting with the autosomal dominant conditions. If I'm writing this number one box, you see the metabolic flavor. Flavor of metabolic means likely be an autosomal recessive, but they are autosomal dominant. So is all right, these will be helpful, right? What really means, A for AIPs, A for antithrombin 3 deficiencies, all right? And H for, yes, once again, hyperlipidemia, H for hypogenic periodic paralysis, and H for malignant hyperthermia. So this is the bundle pack of the H, and this bundle pack for A. Another important box that I'd like to write here, if I'm writing the SS box of hemolytic anemia, all right, if I'm writing the hemolytic anemias, so you see that I'm writing from outside to inside. If I'm writing the cells, the RBC, if I'm going from outside to inside, so if I'm writing the cell membrane, Defect means hereditary spherocytosis. This is autosomal dominant. This is very important. Next point. This is the hemoglobinopathies. If I am writing the hemoglobinopathies, means thalassemia plus sickle cell disease. These are autosomal recessive disorder. Next point, the enzyme deficiency. Yes, enzymes. This is the enzymes. If I am writing the enzymes, means G6, PDH means H for, remember the H disease means the XLR. So this is a very important box of autoimmune, means the hemolytic anemias, especially the hereditary hemolysis, congenital hemolytic anemias box. Yes, once again, let me start by metabolic flavor, but the autosomal dominant. Number 2, the box, the mixed. Mixed is a cause of blue sclera. So the mixed are autosomal dominant. So M for Marfan's, I for imperfecta, and XE for xanthoma-elastica, and ED for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. All are autosomal dominant, but having a pseudo-xanthoma, pseudo, having some of the mixed or maybe the question mark. Number 3 box, you see the neuroectodermal diseases are autosomal dominant, means the neurofibromatosis and tuberous sclerosis. 4th box, you see the familial, having the familial colorectal cancer syndrome, definitely autosomal dominant. HNPCC or Lynch syndrome is the most common familial colorectal cancer syndrome. And also the familial adenomatous polyposis and Peutz-Jeghers syndrome. And you'll see in the GIT also we are discussing the same thing. All are autosomal dominant. Number 5 is a TRATS, is a trinuclear repeat expansion disorder. Is a mnemonics is an FDH, means the F to DH, means 2F disease and D and DH, all right? Means the Friedreich's ataxia, fragile X syndrome is said that XLR and DM having the D, so that's why I put the D for dominant and HD for Huntington's disease, also the dominant disease. The way I'm writing, my dear, that will be helpful. Just follow me. All right. Many times I used to say, why? Because sometimes you are right, may not be right. Concentrate. So please be concentrated what I'm saying. So here's the long QT syndrome. Once again, the congenital long QT syndrome is the Jarvik-Lange Romano-Ward syndrome. So D for dominant and others, that is the autosomal recessive disorder. Number 7, the other diseases are autosomal dominance. Yes, A for achondroplasia, dominant. AD, PKD, once again, dominance. And Dunen syndrome and Dohn-Hippel-Lindau syndrome, once again, Dohn and Dohn means the dominant. Number 8, familial or hereditary is names, but they are flavor autosomal dominant, but they are autosomal recessive, like the familial Mediterranean fever, hereditary ataxias, and then hereditary hemochromatosis. Same thing, the next box, number 9. So chronic liver disease, the metabolic causes of chronic liver disease are all are autosomal recessive, but the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is separate entities. They are not inheritance. So hereditary hemochromatosis, Wilson's disease, A1, ATD, and cystic fibrosis. And number 10 box, you see the mucopolysaccharidosis. You see the Harlers having double R means the autosomal recessive. And Hunter's only the single R, only the single R, XLR. It will be helpful. Hunting female, XLR. Hunters also, right? The Harlers, AR, autosomal recessive. Number 11, there is the autosomal recessive disorder. You see the congenital adenohyperplasia, cystinuria, homocystinuria, phenylketonuria. So this is another box. And also the Fanconi anemias, as well as you see the CFG. You write this group of disorders, CFG. All right, glycogen storage disorder and lipid storage. They are flavors of autosomal recessive, typical autosomal recessive disorders. 12. X-linked recessive disorder, the H disease. H for, yes, hemophilus, we know, and other two important is H and H. Means the G6PD-H and H for Hunter's disease. Plus, these boxes are also very important. A for AIS bundle pack, B for BMD bundle pack, and C for CB bundle pack. Yes. Color blindness, retinitis pigmentosa, and Lesch-Nyhan syndrome, BMD, DMD, and also diabetes insipidus nephrogenic. And yes, once again, AIS and Fabry's disease, and Ehlers means the WAS, means the Wiskott-Ehlers syndrome. So yes, the H plus, we can write the H plus ABC. The next 14 box, right? Altogether, there is hereditary or hemolytic congenital anemias that you see. The outside autosomal dominant, then the hemoglobinopathies are autosomal recessive, and enzymes, once again, XLR. Another compare and contrast. And last, number 15 box, you see, X-linked dominant disease, airport syndrome is Alport syndrome. Airport, once again, RR, Rettis, and rickets is the vitamin D resistant rickets, RR. So, my dear, this is very important. Start with the number 1 box is the metabolic flavor, but autosomal dominant. These are, remember, mixed blue, autosomal dominant. Neuroectodermal disease, autosomal dominant. Familial colorectal cancer syndromes are autosomal dominant. TRATs are F to DH. LQTS are Romano word, D for autosomal dominant. Autosomal dominant are nothing but the achondroplasia and also the ADPKD means ADIS. The mnemonics itself is an ADIS. Familial or hereditary name, but they are autosomal recessive. These are FMF, HS, and HH. Chronic liver disease, metabolic diseases are autosomal recessive disorder. Hurlers, double R, AR. Hunter, hunting female, XLR. Autosomal recessive CFG, pure diseases are pure names, metabolic disorder. And next, the XLR, X-linked recessive disease, H plus ABC. And the hereditary or hemolytic anemias, congenital, AD, AR, XLR. And last, XLD, AR4, double R, rat, and resistant rickets. I hope that my dear you enjoyed. Thank you very much. If you like our videos, don't forget to subscribe our channel and click on bell button to get more updates.